My name is Amber Sullivan, and I'm 28 years old. Standing in that cold courthouse, my hands trembled as I clutched the sealed manila envelope. My parents sat across the aisle, smirking confidently as they sued me for every penny my grandparents left me. They had no idea what was inside this envelope. Evidence that would shatter their perfect facade. My parents thought they'd walk out owning everything I had. They never expected what would happen next. Before I tell you how my world exploded that day in court, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to family who tried to take what was rightfully yours. Growing up, my parents were always too busy building their careers to raise me. My father, James Sullivan, worked as an investment banker in Boston, constantly chasing the next big deal. My mother, Patricia, focused on climbing the corporate ladder at a marketing firm. I remember long stretches of time when I wouldn't see either of them for weeks. They lived in a sleek downtown apartment that never felt like home. All glass and chrome with no warmth. There were no family photos, no refrigerator artwork. Just expensive decor that shouldn't be touched. When I was 4, they started leaving me with my grandparents on weekends. By the time I turned 6, weekends had turned into months. Grandpa Frank and Grandma Rose owned a modest 2-story home in a small town called Millfield, about 40 minutes outside Boston. Their house had a wraparound porch where Grandma would rock me to sleep on summer nights. The floorboards creaked in all the right places, and the walls were covered with family photos, including pictures of my parents that I studied endlessly, wondering when they'd come back for me. Grandpa Frank owned Sullivan's Hardware, a local institution that had served the community for over 30 years. The store smelled of sawdust and paint, with narrow aisles packed with everything from screwdrivers to specialized tools. From the age of 7, I'd sit behind the counter on a special stool Grandpa made just for me, carefully counting change for customers. He taught me about inventory, customer service, and the value of honest work. A business is only as good as its reputation, he'd say, showing me how to properly cut keys or mix paint colors. Grandma Rose had been a kindergarten teacher before retiring to help run the store's books. She instilled in me a love of learning, sitting patiently with me every evening as I worked through homework. On weekends, we'd bake together. Her famous blueberry pies for special occasions and chocolate chip cookies that we'd bring to the store for loyal customers. Family takes care of family, Grandma would say while kneading dough. That's what matters most in this world. My parents would visit occasionally, usually around Christmas or when they needed something. Each visit followed the same pattern. Initial excitement as they arrived with expensive gifts, followed by hushed arguments with my grandparents about money. They'd leave abruptly, promising to call more often, promises that evaporated as soon as they drove away. When I was 10, Grandpa had his first heart attack. I remember sitting in the hospital waiting room, terrified I might lose him. My parents showed up briefly, spoke with doctors about costs, then left to catch a business flight. Grandma and I stayed for 3 days straight until Grandpa was stable enough to come home. During his recovery, I took on more responsibility at the store, helping customers find products and taking phone orders after school. By the time I turned 14, Grandpa's health had improved, but the incident changed something in him. He became determined to secure my future. I'd overhear him talking to Grandma about setting money aside, about making sure she'll always be taken care of. He expanded the hardware store, adding a garden center that quickly became popular with local homeowners. On my 16th birthday, my grandparents sat me down at the kitchen table. They'd prepared my favorite meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, and baked a chocolate cake decorated with blue frosting. After dinner, Grandpa cleared his throat and reached for a folder. "Amber," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "your grandma and I have something important to ask you." Inside the folder were legal papers for guardianship. My parents had agreed to sign over legal custody to my grandparents. I wasn't surprised. It merely formalized what had been true for years, but seeing it in official documents made me feel both secure and abandoned. "We want to make it official," Grandma explained, squeezing my hand. "We want everyone to know you're ours." I cried that night, not from sadness but from overwhelming gratitude. My grandparents had chosen me, while my parents had chosen everything else. High school years passed with Grandpa and Grandma attending every band concert, parent-teacher conference, and track meet. I worked at the store after school and on weekends, learning every aspect of the business. When college application season arrived, they encouraged me to apply anywhere I wanted. Your education is your future, Grandpa insisted. Don't worry about the cost. I earned a partial scholarship to Boston University, and my grandparents proudly covered the remaining tuition. I majored in business with a minor in environmental sustainability, inspired by Grandpa's hardware store and Grandma's love of gardening. Every Sunday, I'd take the train back to Millfield for family dinner, bringing my laundry and returning with containers of home-cooked meals. My parents sent occasional checks for spending money but rarely called. When they did reach out, the conversations were brief and superficial. They never asked about my classes or visited campus, even though they lived just across the city. Despite their absence, I thrived in college. My grandparents had given me something my parents never could: stability, confidence, and unconditional love. I graduated knowing exactly who I was and what mattered to me. I graduated from Boston University on a perfect May afternoon. The ceremony took place on the Commons, with thousands of chairs arranged in neat rows and proud families clutching bouquets and balloons. Grandpa wore his best suit, the one reserved for weddings and funerals, and Grandma dabbed at happy tears throughout the ceremony. When my name was called, I heard Grandpa's distinctive whistle cutting through the applause. As I made my way through the crowd after receiving my diploma, I spotted them, my parents standing awkwardly next to my grandparents. My mother wore an expensive cream-colored dress that looked out of place among the casual attire of other families. My father checked his watch repeatedly, as though he had somewhere more important to be. "Congratulations, sweetheart," my mother said, air-kissing both my cheeks. "We're so proud." My father handed me an envelope. "For your achievement," he said stiffly. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a card signed by their personal assistant. I thanked them politely, surprised they'd bothered to come at all. It had been almost a year since I'd last seen them. "We were thinking," my mother continued, her voice bright with unusual enthusiasm, "maybe you could join us for dinner next week? Catch up properly." I glanced at my grandparents, who exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. Something had changed. Later, I learned that Grandpa's hardware store had recently expanded to a second location, after securing a large contract with a regional building company. The timing of my parents' renewed interest didn't feel coincidental. Over the next few months, my parents initiated more contact than they had in years. They invited me to dinners at expensive restaurants, sent birthday gifts for the first time in a decade, and even suggested a family vacation. I allowed myself to hope that perhaps they genuinely wanted to reconnect, that maybe they regretted missing so much of my life. Then Grandma got sick. The diagnosis came suddenly: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months at most. I immediately moved back to Millfield, setting up my laptop in my childhood bedroom and arranging to work remotely. My job at an environmental consulting firm was demanding, but my boss understood the situation and allowed me flexibility to care for Grandma. My parents began visiting more frequently as Grandma's condition deteriorated. They'd arrive with gourmet food baskets we never asked for, and would spend more time talking with Grandpa in his office than sitting with Grandma. During one of these visits, I went downstairs for a glass of water and overheard them in the kitchen. "Frank's done well with the expansion," my father was saying. "The second location is already turning a profit. And the house has appreciated considerably," my mother added. "This neighborhood has become quite desirable. We should discuss the estate planning soon," my father continued, "before things get more complicated." I stood frozen in the hallway, the pieces clicking into place. Their renewed interest coincided perfectly with Grandpa's business success and Grandma's illness. They weren't here for family, they were here for assets. The next morning, I confronted them as they prepared to leave. "I heard you talking last night," I said directly, "about Grandpa's business and the estate planning." My mother's smile tightened. "It's completely normal to discuss these things, Amber. We're just trying to help your grandfather organize his affairs." "He doesn't need your help," I replied. "He has accountants and lawyers." "Don't be dramatic," my father cut in. "We're his children. We have every right to be involved in family financial matters. You weren't involved in family anything until there was money to be made, I said, my voice shaking. My mother's expression hardened. You've always been so ungrateful. We gave you everything. Grandma and Grandpa gave me everything, I corrected. You gave me up. They left angry. But they didn't stay away for long. Grandma passed away 3 months later, peacefully in her sleep with Grandpa holding one hand and me holding the other. The funeral was beautiful and heartbreaking, filled with former students, neighbors, and store customers whose lives she'd touched. My parents worked the room like it was a networking event, exchanging business cards with attendees and discussing property values with distant relatives. After the funeral, while sorting through Grandma's belongings, I discovered a box of letters in her closet. Among them were emails my parents had sent, requesting loans for various business ventures over the years, loans that, according to Grandma's careful notes, were never repaid. The most recent request had come just 2 weeks before her diagnosis. Grandpa fell into a deep depression after losing Grandma. They had been married for 52 years, and her absence left him adrift. He'd sit in his recliner for hours, staring at her empty chair across the room. The store remained open thanks to loyal employees, but Grandpa rarely went in anymore. I took family leave from my job to care for him, cooking meals he barely touched and making sure he took his heart medication. My parents visited weekly now, always steering conversations toward finances, the business, and planning for the future. As Grandpa's depression worsened, my suspicion about my parents' motives grew. 6 months after Grandma's passing, I juggled caring for Grandpa with remote work and managing the hardware store. The employees were fantastic. Many had worked for my grandparents for decades, but major decisions still required family input. Grandpa tried to engage, but his spark had dimmed considerably. My parents intensified their presence in our lives. My mother suggested Grandpa add her to his bank accounts, just in case something happens. My father offered to review the store's financial records to streamline operations. Their persistence wore Grandpa down, and against my private objections, he eventually agreed to add my mother as a signatory on his personal checking account. It's temporary, he assured me, just until I'm feeling more myself. I should have fought harder, but I was exhausted from balancing work and caregiving. I also didn't want to upset Grandpa by creating family conflict when he was already struggling. 3 weeks later, I noticed discrepancies while paying Grandpa's bills. Several large withdrawals had been made from his account, withdrawals he had no recollection of authorizing. When I called the bank, they confirmed my mother had made the transactions in person. That evening, I confronted my parents during their visit. $7,000, Mom? For what? I demanded, showing her the bank statement. Your grandfather agreed to help us with some investments, she replied smoothly. It's a family matter. I turned to Grandpa. Did you approve these withdrawals? His confused expression answered before his words did. I don't remember discussing any investments. You did, Dad, my mother insisted. Last week when we talked about diversifying your assets. My father stepped in. We're simply protecting family assets. The money isn't gone. It's being better managed. Better managed where? I pressed. Because it's not in any of Grandpa's accounts. You're overstepping, Amber, my father said coldly. We're his children. We have every right to help manage his finances. Not without his informed consent, I replied. The argument escalated until Grandpa clutched his chest and asked everyone to stop. Terrified of triggering another heart attack, I backed down. But that night I contacted a lawyer friend for advice. 2 days later, Grandpa suffered a severe stroke. I found him collapsed in the bathroom and called 911. At the hospital, doctors confirmed he'd need extensive rehabilitation. When my parents arrived, their first questions weren't about his condition but about insurance coverage and costs. We should move him to Lakeside Rehabilitation, my mother suggested, scrolling through her phone. It's much more affordable. His doctor recommends Brighton Recovery Center, I countered. They specialize in stroke rehabilitation. Brighton is unnecessarily expensive, my father argued. Lakeside will be adequate. Adequate isn't good enough, I insisted. And his insurance covers Brighton. After they left, I spoke with Grandpa's doctor, who confirmed Brighton was far superior for his specific needs. Against my parents' objections, I arranged his transfer there, using my own savings to cover what insurance wouldn't. During Grandpa's third week at Brighton, I visited his house to collect more clothes and found the office door ajar. Inside, drawers had been opened and papers disorganized. The filing cabinet where Grandpa kept financial documents was unlocked, with several folders missing. When I checked his home safe, I discovered that bonds and stock certificates were gone. Panicked, I went straight to the bank. The customer service representative confirmed more withdrawals had been made, substantial ones. When I explained the situation, she looked troubled. "Your grandfather's accounts have been nearly emptied," she said quietly. "Your mother made the withdrawals yesterday, totaling just over $200,000. I sat there stunned, processing the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just financial manipulation, it was elder abuse. At the rehabilitation center that afternoon, I found Grandpa more lucid than he'd been since the stroke. When I gently asked about the financial documents and withdrawals, his eyes filled with tears. "They said if I didn't sign, they'd put me in a state facility," he confessed. "Said they'd sell the store to cover medical costs. I didn't know what else to do, Amber." His words broke my heart and ignited something fierce within me. "Can you tell me exactly what happened, Grandpa? They brought papers for me to sign. My eyes aren't good since the stroke, and my hand shakes. They said they were medical authorizations." He paused, struggling with the admission. "I think I made a terrible mistake." "It's not your fault," I assured him, squeezing his hand. "Can you do something for me? Can we call Mr. Peterson?" Mr. Peterson had been our family attorney for decades, handling everything from business contracts to Grandma and Grandpa's will. Though in his 70s himself, he still practiced law and had been like an uncle to me growing up. The next day, Mr. Peterson visited Grandpa at the rehabilitation center. I waited outside during their private conversation, pacing the hallway anxiously. After an hour, Mr. Peterson emerged, his expression grave. "Your grandfather updated his will 6 months ago, shortly after your grandmother passed," he informed me. "He left the business, house, and majority of his assets to you, with provisions for charitable donations to causes your grandmother supported." "Did my parents know about this?" "They were informed last month," he confirmed. "They didn't take it well." That explained the sudden escalation in their behavior. They weren't just trying to siphon money. They were attempting to drain accounts before the will could be executed. When I told Mr. Peterson about the missing documents and unauthorized withdrawals, his bushy eyebrows drew together in concern. "This is serious, Amber. Very serious indeed." The next day, my parents arrived at the rehabilitation center with their own attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Gerald Hoffman from Hoffman and Associates. They requested a private meeting with Grandpa. I refused to leave the room. "We're here to discuss your father's competency evaluation," Mr. Hoffman stated coldly. "We have concerns about his ability to make sound financial decisions." "This is the first I'm hearing about any competency evaluation," I replied. "That's because you're not his legal guardian," my mother said with a smirk. "We're his next of kin." "I'm staying," I insisted, meeting my father's glare. What followed was an hour of thinly veiled threats and manipulations as they tried to convince Grandpa to sign papers requesting a competency hearing, papers that would have given them temporary control of his assets during the evaluation period. Grandpa, stronger than I'd seen him in months, refused. "I know what I'm doing," he said firmly. "And I know what you're trying to do." As they left, my father turned to me. "This isn't over, Amber. Not by a long shot." He was right about that. 3 weeks later, Grandpa came home from rehabilitation. Though still using a walker and speaking with a slight slur, he'd made remarkable progress. The house had been modified with ramps and safety rails, and I'd converted the downstairs study into a bedroom, so he wouldn't have to manage stairs. On his second night home, he passed peacefully in his sleep. The doctor said it was a second stroke, massive and quick. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. I found him in the morning looking peaceful, a framed photo of Grandma clutched to his chest. In my grief, I forgot about the inheritance battle brewing at least for a few days. The reading of the will took place in Mr. Peterson's wood-paneled office downtown. My parents arrived with their attorney, both dressed in expensive black attire that seemed more performative than respectful. I wore the blue sweater Grandma had knitted for me years ago. Grandpa's favorite. Mr. Peterson read the will methodically, his voice steady and professional. As he had told me earlier, Grandpa had left the hardware store, the house, and the majority of his savings to me. There were specific charitable donations to the local library where Grandma had volunteered, and the hospital that had treated her cancer. My parents received some family heirlooms and a modest monetary bequest. This is unacceptable, my father interrupted before Mr. Peterson finished. My father was not in his right mind when he made these changes. Frank was clearly manipulated, my mother added, glaring at me. Amber took advantage of his grief and diminished capacity. Their attorney stepped forward, handing Mr. Peterson a thick folder. We're contesting the will on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. Mr. Peterson accepted the documents with a calmness that came from decades of legal practice. You're within your rights to contest. But I can assure you that Frank was of sound mind when he updated his will. I personally assessed his capacity, as did an independent medical professional. We'll let a judge decide that, Mr. Hoffman replied smoothly. As we left the office, my mother grabbed my arm. You won't get away with this, Amber. We know what you did. What I did. I pulled away from her grip. I took care of him. Where were you for the last 20 years? We were building a future for this family, my father snapped. A future you're now trying to steal. You can't steal what was freely given, I replied. Over the next few weeks, their campaign against me intensified. They told family friends I had manipulated Grandpa while he was vulnerable. They claimed I'd isolated him from them during his final months. Some people in town, those who didn't know me well, began treating me differently, whispering when I passed. Then I discovered the break-in. Coming home from a meeting with my own attorney, I found the back door of Grandpa's house jimmied open. Inside, his office had been ransacked, drawers emptied, books pulled from shelves, the antique desk overturned. The family photo albums were untouched, as was Grandma's jewelry box. This wasn't a random burglary. Someone had been looking for something specific. The most disturbing discovery was the empty safe behind Grandpa's favorite painting. A safe only family knew about. Missing were Grandpa's personal journals, additional financial documents, and several family heirlooms including Grandma's wedding ring, which had been passed down through generations. I called the police immediately. Officer Jenkins arrived quickly, taking detailed notes and photographs. As she worked, a detective named Lisa Morales joined us, her interest seemingly piqued by the selective nature of the break-in. You mentioned your parents are contesting the will, Detective Morales said as we stood in the destroyed office. Do they have keys to the house? They shouldn't, I replied. But they've been here many times over the years. She nodded thoughtfully. The hardware store has security cameras, correct? Yes. Inside and out. You might want to check if those cameras cover the key cutting station, she suggested. Just to be thorough. That night, I reviewed the security footage from the store's computer system. Sure enough, 3 weeks earlier, my father had entered the store during the busy lunch rush. While the employee was helping another customer, he'd accessed the key-cutting machine himself, something regular customers would never do. The next day, legal notices arrived informing me that my parents were suing for control of the estate, claiming Grandpa had been incompetent when changing his will, and that I had exerted undue influence over him. They demanded the business, house, and all assets, plus punitive damages for my alleged manipulation. Their lawsuit painted me as a calculating opportunist who had taken advantage of an elderly man's grief and illness. The accusations were so wildly inaccurate they would have been laughable if they weren't so devastating. My attorney advised that fighting the case could take years and drain the very estate they were seeking. Even if we win, she explained, the legal fees could bankrupt the business. That night, alone in the house that still smelled faintly of Grandpa's pipe tobacco and Grandma's lavender sachets, I broke down completely. The weight of grief, betrayal, and fear crushed me. Had I done something wrong without realizing it? Had I somehow influenced Grandpa inappropriately? The doubt crept in, poisoning my memories and shaking my confidence. I sat on the porch swing where Grandma used to rock me to sleep, sobbing until my throat was raw and my eyes burned. It was the darkest moment of my life, losing my grandparents and now potentially losing everything they'd worked for, all while being vilified by my own parents. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I wouldn't let them rewrite our family history. I wouldn't let them tarnish what my grandparents had built. And I certainly wouldn't let them win through intimidation and lies. It was time to fight back. The morning after my breakdown, I began methodically searching the house. If my parents had broken in looking for something specific, there must be documents or evidence they feared. Grandpa had been meticulous about record keeping. Perhaps he'd left something they hadn't found. In Grandma's sewing room, I moved the heavy vintage Singer machine and discovered a loose floorboard underneath. Inside the small cavity was a leather-bound journal I recognized as Grandpa's, along with a USB drive labeled Insurance. The journal contained detailed accounts of my parents' visits over the past year, including verbatim conversations about accessing his money. Grandpa had documented every financial request, every subtle threat, and every manipulation attempt. Reading his neat handwriting describing how they pressured him while he was grieving Grandma broke my heart all over again. Patricia suggested I should add her to my accounts today. One entry read, "When I hesitated, James mentioned how expensive good nursing homes are." Not a direct threat, but the implication was clear. The USB drive contained scanned financial records, emails between my parents discussing strategies to secure the assets before it's too late, and audio files. With shaking hands, I plugged in my headphones and listened. Grandpa had recorded conversations in his office, legal in our state, which required only one-party consent for recordings. In one particularly damning recording, my mother could be heard saying, "Dad, you're not thinking clearly since Mom died. Let us handle the money. Amber doesn't need to know the details." Armed with this new evidence, I contacted an attorney specializing in elder abuse cases. Samuel Washington had silver hair, kind eyes, and a reputation for being relentless in court. During our consultation, he reviewed the materials I'd found and nodded gravely. "This is a clear case of attempted financial exploitation," he confirmed. "Your grandfather was protecting himself, and you by documenting everything. Will it be enough to stop their lawsuit?" "It's a good start," he said, "but we need more. We need to build a comprehensive case that not only defeats their claims, but potentially supports criminal charges." Over the next 3 weeks, Samuel and I worked systematically to piece together evidence. We obtained bank records showing the pattern of withdrawals that coincided with my parents' visits. We interviewed the bank teller who remembered my mother's insistence on processing large withdrawals despite the bank's concerns. She said her father needed the cash for medical treatments not covered by insurance, the teller recalled. When I suggested a cashier's check for safety, she became agitated. We also retrieved medical records confirming Grandpa had been declared competent by multiple doctors, including on the day he updated his will. The neurologist who examined him noted specifically, "Patient demonstrates clear understanding of his assets and express wishes regarding their distribution." Detective Morales became an unexpected ally. After reviewing the evidence of the break-in alongside the financial records, she opened an investigation into potential elder financial abuse. Her involvement lent credibility to our case and provided access to resources we otherwise wouldn't have had. Financial crimes against seniors are often overlooked, she explained during one of our meetings. Perpetrators count on shame and family loyalty to keep victims silent. The security footage from the hardware store proved crucial. Not only did it show my father making unauthorized keys, but it also captured my parents entering the store after hours on multiple occasions, removing inventory and accessing the office computer. A forensic accountant discovered systematic theft from the business over the previous 6 months, inventory sold but never recorded, cash deposits that never made it to the bank, and suspicious refunds processed when the store was closed. One rainy afternoon, while reviewing old emails on Grandpa's computer, I found correspondence between him and his doctor that referenced recordings he'd made of conversations with my parents. The email mentioned a second USB drive hidden, where Rose keeps her treasures. I knew immediately he meant Grandma's jewelry box, the one heirloom my parents hadn't taken during the break-in. Inside a hidden compartment beneath the velvet lining, I found another USB drive, this one labeled simply Truth. The recordings on this drive were even more explicit. In one, my father could clearly be heard saying, "Once we sell the business, we can use the money to pay off our debts. You don't need 2 stores at your age anyway." My mother added, "We've found a nice assisted living facility in Arizona, much cheaper than staying here. And you won't have to worry about maintaining the house." Grandpa's voice weary but firm. "This house and business are staying in the family. I've already decided they'll go to Amber." My father's response sent chills down my spine. "That can be changed, Dad. One competency hearing is all it would take." As we built our case, I continued running the hardware store, honoring commitments to employees and customers. One afternoon, a longtime customer named Harold Jenkins approached me at the register. "I was here last month when your parents were arguing with Frank," he said quietly. "I heard them threatening to contest his will if he didn't change it. Thought you should know I'd be willing to make a statement if needed." His offer of support meant more than he could know. Gradually, other community members came forward with similar accounts, people who had witnessed my parents' behavior toward Grandpa or had overheard concerning conversations. Meanwhile, my parents escalated their public campaign against me. They gave interviews to local papers, portraying themselves as loving children trying to protect their father's legacy from my manipulative influence. They claimed Grandpa had promised them the business years ago, and that I had coerced him into changing his will. Samuel advised letting them continue. "They're creating a public record of demonstrable lies," he explained. "Every false statement strengthens our case." When their lawsuit proceeded to the preliminary hearing stage, Samuel prepared a comprehensive counterclaim alleging elder abuse, fraud, theft, and breaking and entering. The document was meticulous, citing specific dates, amounts, and evidence for each allegation. "We won't file this yet," he explained. "First, let's see how they present their case. Sometimes it's better to let the opposition reveal their strategy before showing your full hand." The night before the hearing, Samuel handed me a sealed manila envelope. "This contains everything: the journal entries, bank records, security footage stills, and transcripts of the recordings. I've organized it chronologically with an index for the judge." "Will the judge actually review all this?" I asked, feeling the weight of the envelope. "Judge Montgomery is known for his thoroughness in elder abuse cases," Samuel assured me. "He'll review every page." That night, I sat in Grandpa's favorite chair, holding the envelope and trying to calm my nerves. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. I was fighting for justice for my grandparents. They had protected me my entire life. Now it was my turn to protect their legacy. "I won't let you down," I whispered to their photos on the mantel. "I promise." The county courthouse was imposing, all marble columns and heavy wooden doors that seemed designed to intimidate. I arrived early, dressed in a conservative navy suit that had belonged to Grandma. Samuel met me on the steps, his briefcase and confidence equally solid. "Remember," he advised, "no matter what they say, remain calm. Let your evidence speak for itself." Inside, my parents were already seated with their attorney and 2 assistants. My mother wore an expensive cream suit that reminded me of her outfit at my graduation, while my father fiddled with his gold cufflinks, a nervous habit I recognized from childhood. They didn't acknowledge me when I entered. Judge Montgomery was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He began the proceedings promptly at 9, reviewing the case summary before inviting my parents' attorney to present their petition. Mr. Hoffman approached the podium with rehearsed confidence. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of undue influence and testamentary incapacity. Frank Sullivan was suffering from cognitive decline following his wife's death and a debilitating stroke. During this vulnerable period, his granddaughter, who lived in his home and controlled his daily care, manipulated him into changing his will to disinherit his own children. He proceeded to paint a fictional narrative where my parents had been devoted caregivers periodically blocked from visiting by my interference. He claimed Grandpa had always intended for his children to inherit the family business, presenting emails from over a decade ago discussing potential succession plans. Furthermore, Hoffman continued, Ms. Sullivan isolated her grandfather from proper legal counsel, arranging for will changes through a family friend rather than independent representation. My grip tightened on my armrest, but Samuel placed a calming hand on mine, silently reminding me to stay composed. Next, my parents took the stand one after another, delivering emotional testimonies about their close relationship with Grandpa and their devastation at being cut out of his will due to my manipulation. My mother actually produced tears when describing how she'd been denied access during Grandpa's final days, a blatant lie, as she'd visited only twice during his last month. We just want to honor our father's true wishes, my father concluded solemnly. The business has been in our family for generations, and he always intended for it to stay that way. Throughout their testimony, Judge Montgomery remained inscrutable, occasionally making notes but revealing nothing through his expression. When Mr. Hoffman finally concluded, the judge turned to Samuel. Mr. Washington, would you like to respond to these allegations? Samuel stood calmly. Yes, Your Honor. Before presenting our response, we would like to submit additional evidence for the court's consideration. He approached the bench with the manila envelope. This contains documented evidence of financial exploitation, including bank records, security footage, medical evaluations confirming Mr. Sullivan's competence, and recordings made by Mr. Sullivan himself during interactions with the petitioners. My parents shifted uncomfortably as Samuel returned to our table. Judge Montgomery opened the envelope, removing the first few documents. As he read, his expression changed subtly, his eyebrows rising, then drawing together in concern. He spent several minutes reviewing the materials before looking up. Court will recess for 30 minutes while I review these documents in chambers. Counsel for both parties, please join me. As they disappeared into the judge's chambers, my parents leaned toward their remaining team, whispering urgently. The half-hour stretched painfully, but finally the door reopened. Samuel emerged looking quietly confident, while Mr. Hoffman appeared visibly shaken. Judge Montgomery returned to the bench, his demeanor noticeably different, more focused, almost stern. Before he could speak, Mr. Hoffman requested permission to approach. After a brief whispered exchange, the judge nodded. It appears there have been some developments, Judge Montgomery announced. Mr. Hoffman has requested a brief consultation with his clients. The Hoffmans huddled with my parents in intense conversation. My mother's face flushed with anger while my father repeatedly shook his head. When they returned to their seats, Mr. Hoffman addressed the court. Your Honor, given the new information presented, my clients would like to request a continuance to review and respond to these allegations. Judge Montgomery peered over his reading glasses. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Counselor. The evidence presented raises serious concerns that go beyond civil matters. Court officer, please summon the bailiff and Detective Morales. My heart pounded as two uniformed officers entered the courtroom, followed by Detective Morales and another plainclothes officer. They positioned themselves near the entrance while the judge continued. Having reviewed the evidence submitted by the respondent, I am compelled to take immediate action. The materials contain credible evidence of criminal activity, including financial elder abuse, fraud, theft, and breaking and entering. My parents half rose from their seats in alarm, but Mr. Hoffman motioned for them to remain seated. Patricia and James Sullivan, the judge continued. This court is referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation and potential criminal charges. Detective Morales will need to speak with you both immediately. This is outrageous, my father exploded, standing fully now. You can't possibly believe. Mr. Sullivan, Judge Montgomery interrupted sharply. I suggest you exercise your right to remain silent at this time. What I have reviewed includes recordings in your own voice making explicit threats to exploit your father financially, bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals, and security footage of you removing property from his business after hours. My mother turned to Mr. Hoffman, her voice shrill. Do something. Instead, he placed his legal pad on the table and stepped back. Your Honor, in light of these developments, I must withdraw as counsel for the petitioners. Noted, the judge replied, then turned to me directly. Miss Sullivan, this court recognizes the difficulty of these proceedings for you. Based on the overwhelming evidence of your grandfather's competence and the documented attempts to exploit him, I am dismissing the petition to contest the will with prejudice. Relief washed over me so intensely I nearly collapsed in my seat. Furthermore, he continued, I am issuing an immediate freeze on all contested assets pending the criminal investigation, with temporary control remaining with Ms. Sullivan as stipulated in the valid will. Detective Morales approached my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, we need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding the financial transactions and other evidence presented today. As they were escorted from the courtroom, my mother turned to glare at me one last time. Her expression wasn't just anger. It was stunned disbelief that her plans had collapsed so spectacularly. When the courtroom had cleared, Judge Montgomery addressed me directly, his formal tone softening slightly. Miss Sullivan, while I cannot comment on the pending criminal investigation, I can say that your grandfather would be proud of how you've protected his wishes. The court recognizes the emotional toll this must have taken. The clerk will provide information about victim services that may be helpful in the coming months. Outside the courthouse, standing in the sunshine, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The battle wasn't completely over. The criminal investigation would bring its own challenges, but Grandpa and Grandma's legacy was secure. Samuel shook my hand warmly. Your grandparents raised you right, he said. They knew exactly what they were doing when they chose you. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. I had honored my promise to them. I had protected what they built. And most importantly, I had exposed the truth. In the months following the courthouse confrontation, life slowly began to find a new rhythm. Detective Morales kept me updated on the criminal investigation, which expanded as forensic accountants uncovered the full extent of my parents' financial schemes. The evidence was overwhelming, not just their actions against Grandpa, but a pattern of fraudulent business dealings stretching back years. We've frozen their accounts and secured indictments on multiple charges, she explained during one of our meetings. Elder financial abuse, grand theft, breaking and entering, and falsifying documents. Rather than face a public trial, my parents eventually accepted a plea deal, restitution of all stolen funds, significant community service, and probation with strict financial oversight. The terms included a restraining order preventing them from contacting me or approaching any properties associated with the estate. The hardware store thrived under my management. I implemented some of the sustainability initiatives I'd studied in college, adding eco-friendly product lines and solar panels on the roof. Regular customers commented that Grandpa would have loved the innovations while appreciating how I maintained the store's community-focused heart. Frank always said you had the best of him and rose in you, Harold Jenkins told me one afternoon while purchasing garden supplies. Smart like him, compassionate like her. With part of my inheritance, I established the Frank and Rose Sullivan Scholarship Fund for local students pursuing trades or small business management. Each year, we supported 5 students with tuition and mentorship, continuing my grandparents' legacy of building up the community that had supported them. The healing process wasn't linear. Some days, the grief and betrayal felt as fresh as ever. I found a therapist specializing in family trauma, who helped me process the complex emotions of losing my grandparents while simultaneously fighting my parents. You're mourning multiple losses, Dar. Winters explained during one session. Your grandparents, the parents you wished you had, and the family narrative you grew up believing. Through therapy, I connected with others who had experienced similar family betrayals. Our support group became a safe space to share stories and strategies for rebuilding life after such fundamental breaches of trust. I was surprised to discover how common financial elder abuse was, often perpetrated by the people closest to the victim. This realization sparked a new purpose. I began working with a legislative advocacy group, focused on strengthening elder protection laws in our state. We lobbied for enhanced penalties for financial exploitation, and improved training for bank employees to recognize warning signs. Sharing Grandpa's story, with its detailed documentation and recordings, provided powerful testimony that helped pass 2 bills increasing protections for vulnerable seniors. The first holiday season without my grandparents was the hardest. The house felt emptier than ever as I unpacked the Christmas decorations Grandma had lovingly stored in labeled boxes. Each ornament held memories: the clay star I'd made in 2nd grade, the glass ball with their wedding date, the tiny hardware store replica Grandpa had commissioned for their 40th anniversary. Rather than dwell in solitude, I invited the store employees and their families for Christmas dinner. We cooked Grandma's recipes together, shared stories about Frank and Rose, and created new traditions while honoring old ones. The house filled with laughter again, something I knew would have made my grandparents happy. One snowy evening in January, while organizing Grandpa's workshop, I found an envelope taped beneath his workbench. Inside was a letter written in his steady hand, dated just a week before his stroke. "My dearest Amber," it began. "If you're reading this, then the worst has happened and the battle I anticipated has begun. Know that your grandmother and I made our decisions with clear minds and full hearts. The business, the house, they were always meant for you. The only one who truly understood their value beyond dollars and cents. Your parents see assets where we saw community. They see dollar signs where we saw responsibility. You see our true legacy. Not just buildings and bank accounts, but relationships, trust, and service. Don't doubt yourself. Even in the darkest moments, you have everything you need to win this fight. We made sure of it. Remember what Grandma always said. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. You showed up every day of our lives, and we are eternally grateful. With all our love, Grandpa and Grandma." Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter. It was the closure I hadn't realized I still needed. Confirmation that I had indeed honored their wishes and protected what mattered most to them. The spring arrived, bringing new growth to Grandma's garden. I found myself increasingly at peace. The hardware store continued to flourish, becoming a model for sustainable small business practices in the region. I purchased the adjacent property to expand the garden center, creating a community space for workshops on sustainable gardening, something Grandma had always dreamed of doing. My parents eventually moved across the country, starting over in California where their reputation hadn't preceded them. We had no contact, and I had come to accept that some relationships simply cannot be repaired, nor should they be. Family toxicity sometimes requires distance rather than reconciliation. The support network I'd built became my chosen family, people connected by love and respect rather than DNA. We celebrated victories together, supported each other through challenges, and created the kind of genuine bonds my grandparents had shown me were possible. 2 years after the courtroom confrontation, I was invited to speak at a conference on elder financial abuse prevention. Standing at the podium, looking out at the roomful of social workers, law enforcement officers, and elder advocates, I shared my grandparents' story. Not just the exploitation they faced, but the foresight and courage they showed in documenting and fighting back. The greatest inheritance my grandparents left wasn't financial, I concluded. It was the example they set of integrity, resilience, and standing up for what's right, even when it's painful. They taught me that true family protects each other, shows up when needed, and values people over possessions. That legacy is worth fighting for. As I stepped away from the microphone to applause, I felt a profound sense of closure. The battle that had once consumed my life had transformed into a mission to help others. The pain had forged purpose. And somewhere, I knew Grandpa and Grandma were proud. If you've ever had to stand up against family exploitation, or are currently facing such a battle, please share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else find the courage to fight back. And if you found strength in hearing how my grandparents' foresight helped justice prevail, please like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for what's right, even when it hurts. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more precious than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my journey. I'm grateful to have shared it with you.